All right, let's dive into a surprise leadership race that just kicked off in Japan. Now, this isn't just some local political shuffle. This is a contest that could totally reshape Japan's economy, its military, and maybe most importantly, its critical alliance with the United States.
So, it really all boils down to one massive question. In a world that's, well, pretty unstable, who's going to be leading America's most important partner in the entire Pacific? The answer is coming, and it's coming fast. So let's break down how this whole thing even started. Okay, so this whole thing was kicked off by a total surprise. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, after just a year in the top job, suddenly stepped down. Sounds like there was a lot of party pressure, and this move, it triggered a sudden high-stakes election for the leader of the ruling party, the Liberal Democratic Party. You'll hear them called the LDP. Now, you've got to understand, in Japan's system, this isn't just a party leadership race. Whoever wins this thing, well, they become the next prime minister. Simple as that. So who actually jumped into the ring for this thing? Well, we've got 5 major candidates who've thrown their hats in. And, to make sense of it all, we've kind of broken them down into 5 different political identities, or archetypes, if you will. All right, here's our lineup. You've got Sanae Takaichi, who we're calling the nationalist hawk. Then there's Shinjiro Koizumi, the young reformer. Yoshimasa Hayashi, he's the steady veteran. We've also got Toshimitsu Motegi, the tough negotiator. And finally, Takayuki Kobayashi, the security technocrat. As you can see, these are 5 very different visions for where Japan goes next. So let's get to know them a bit, shall we? So let's kick things off with Sanae Takaichi. She's a real conservative heavyweight and was a protege of the late, great Shinzo Abe. And this quote right here, it tells you basically everything you need to know. She is an unapologetic hawk, and I don't just mean on defense, I mean on the economy too. She's all about aggressive government spending, and she's not afraid to call out the Bank of Japan, warning them not to raise interest rates. Her message is super direct. Spend big and make the economy grow. And then, talk about a complete change of pace. Meet Shinjiro Koizumi. He's only 44, and he is absolutely the face of a new generation. You might recognize the name. He's the son of a really popular former prime minister. And he's got this knack for modern communication. This quote about making climate change cool and sexy, that perfectly captures his style. When he was environment minister, that's literally what he tried to do, rebrand the whole issue to get young people on board. He is all about change, reform, and just a totally fresh approach. Okay, so if Koizumi is all about the future, Yoshimasa Hayashi is firmly planted in the experienced present. He's a former foreign minister, which means he is a very familiar and trusted face over in Washington. People call him the safe pair of hands, and honestly, that's his entire brand. He's the candidate promising stability, continuity, no surprises, just solid, competent management. Next up is our 4th contender, Toshimitsu Motegi. And this guy is probably the most seasoned politician in the entire race. This little anecdote here, it gets right to the heart of his reputation. He was the guy Japan sent into the room to hammer out those really tough trade deals with the Trump administration. And he actually earned their respect. Former President Trump called him a tough negotiator. And let me tell you, Motegi wears that like a badge of honor. He's all about being that shrewd, experienced dealmaker who fights for Japan's interests no matter what. And rounding out our 5, we have Takayuki Kobayashi. He's another rising star on the conservative side, but his focus is totally different. It's all about 21st century threats. He was Japan's first ever Minister for Economic Security. His whole deal is about protecting the country's critical technology and supply chains from rivals, especially China. A good way to think of him is like a security hawk, but for the digital age. All right, so now we've met the players, but what are they actually arguing about? Well, this whole race really boils down to 2 huge battlegrounds, the economy and foreign policy. Let's take a look at where they all stand. When it comes to the economy, man, the dividing line is crystal clear. You basically have 2 camps. In one corner, you've got Takaichi and Kobayashi. They're pushing for more spending, more stimulus, and tax cuts to help people's wallets right now. But in the other corner, you have Hayashi and Motegi, and they are way more cautious. They're arguing for fiscal discipline. They're okay with interest rate hikes to fight inflation, and they want companies to invest their money, not just rely on government handouts. 2 totally different philosophies. And you know what? The foreign policy debate is just as divided. On one side, you've got the hardliners, that's Takaichi and Kobayashi again. They want to revise Japan's pacifist constitution, take a much more assertive role on the world stage. Takaichi is even talking about a potential quasi-security alliance with Taiwan, which is a huge deal. Then on the other side, you have Hayashi and Motegi. They represent that more traditional diplomatic path. For them, it's all about managing alliances carefully and talking with your neighbors, being pragmatic. Okay, so let's get to the bottom line here. What does all of this actually mean for the United States? Because look, all 5 of these candidates are absolutely committed to the U.S. alliance. That's not up for debate. But the way they would lead would fundamentally change the whole tone and focus of that crucial partnership. Let's take someone like Takaichi, the nationalist hawk. If she becomes prime minister, it's a real double-edged sword for Washington. The pro, you get a super staunch anti-China ally who is definitely going to boost defense spending. But the con? Her nationalist and kind of confrontational style could really stir the pot, maybe creating friction with South Korea, another key U.S. ally, and escalating tensions in the region faster than the U.S. might want. And her fellow hawk, Kobayashi, is similar. He'd be great on aligning with the U.S. on tech security against China, but he might also push for a more independent Japan-first industrial policy. It's complicated. Now, what about the other corner, the establishment veterans? Well, you've got Hayashi, and he is the reassuring choice. U.S. officials know him, they trust him. He's pure continuity and stability. No drama. But then you have Motegi. He also brings stability, but remember, he's the tough negotiator. A Prime Minister Motegi would probably mean a more transactional relationship. Still a reliable partner for sure, but one who's going to drive a much harder bargain on things like trade and defense spending. And that brings us to the wild card, Shinjiro Koizumi. He's a totally different kind of opportunity. He was educated in the U.S., he's focused on modern issues like climate and tech. His popular appeal is off the charts, and he could build huge domestic support for the alliance. So what's the catch? Well, he's relatively inexperienced on the world stage, and that presents a pretty big learning curve if a major crisis hits. So when you step back and look at it, the choice for Japan, and really for its partners like the U.S., is incredibly stark. Nobody's questioning the alliance itself, that's rock solid, but his fundamental character is absolutely on the line. Is it going to become a more assertive, maybe even risk-taking partnership under the Hawks, a stable but more transaction one under the veterans, or a more modern, dynamic alliance led by a young reformer? And that leaves us with the final big question. As Japan's ruling party gets ready to vote, they're not just picking a person, they're choosing a path for the entire country. Will it be the way of the hawkish nationalist, the young reformer, or the steady veteran? Whichever way they go, the answer is going to have ripple effects all across the Pacific.
Okay, let's dive in. We are looking at, well, a pretty high stakes and frankly unplanned political race. It's going to decide who leads Japan next. One of the world's most vital economies and maybe even more crucially, one of America's closest, most reliable allies.
Yeah.
We're talking about the 2025 Liberal Democratic Party presidential election in Japan.
That's right. And just for context, the Liberal Democratic Party, the LDP, I mean, they've been the dominant ruling party in Japan for decades, really.
Right.
So because the LDP is the biggest party in the Diet, that's Japan's parliament, whoever wins this internal leadership race, which is set for October 4th, well, they're almost certainly going to be Japan's next prime minister.
So this isn't just some internal party shuffle then?
No, not at all. I mean, the person who steps into that job, they're going to shape Japan's path domestically, obviously, but also its really delicate relationships with China, with South Korea, and, you know, fundamentally the future of the U.S. Japan security alliance. And that's happening in a pretty volatile time globally.
And the whole thing got kicked off by, well, a bit of a political earthquake, didn't it? Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, he'd only been in office a year.
Just 1 year.
And then, bang, September 7th, 2025, he announces he is resigning.
Yeah, it feels like this whole contest has sort of been forced on the party right when they're feeling most vulnerable.
Exactly. I mean, Ishiba's time in office was cut incredibly short. The sources say it was due to mounting party pressure and electoral setbacks.
Right.
The fact that a sitting LDP prime minister couldn't even finish a full term, I mean, that screams instability, doesn't it? Both within the party and maybe with the voters, too.
Oh, absolutely. This is definitely not some planned, orderly transition. It feels much more like a kind of frantic search for a leader, someone who can maybe turn things around. And it forces this snap leadership contest right under the glare of intense public scrutiny.
Okay, so our mission today then is to try and cut through some of that noise. We've looked at the source materials, you know, the policies, the personalities of the 5 main candidates who are actually vying for this job. We need to unpack what they're promising at home, domestically, but also critically. what their leadership could mean for, global stability and that really crucial relationship with Washington.
And it's quite a spectrum, actually. You've got everything from sort of hardline hawks pushing for constitutional change to these steady technocrats and even a younger reformer who's trying to maybe modernize the party's image a bit.
It's fascinating. But before we get into the candidates themselves, maybe we should paint a picture of the political landscape they're operating in.
Yeah, that's essential. Because, the LDP isn't exactly riding high right now. They're not coming from a position of strength.
Right. So what does that environment look like? Because, like you said, it's not an easy time for them.
No, it's genuinely tough for them. I mean, for decades, the LDP basically ran what people call the one-party dominant system. They almost always had this comfortable, outright majority in parliament. But after some recent electoral losses, they're now actually dealing with a minority government situation. They lost that long-held outright majority, and that fundamentally changes the power dynamics in the Diet.
A minority government. So that means they can't just push laws through anymore. They have to negotiate constantly.
Exactly. They need partners. They have to rely on smaller coalition parties, or maybe even reach out to the opposition sometimes to get crucial bills passed. It's a whole different ballgame.
Right.
And this period, well, many observers are saying this could be the real start of a, quote, competitive multi-party system in Japan. The opposition seems newly energized.
Interesting.
So the LDP can't just rely on its old ways anymore, the internal faction deals, the backroom stuff to pick a leader. The next prime minister, they need real public appeal, some charisma, and they absolutely need to show they can unite different political groups in this new negotiation-heavy world.
So this leadership race is almost existential for them then. They need someone who can win back trust and maybe win back that lost majority.
That's a good way to put it. It's crucial. And this tough backdrop really sets the stage for this contest between, as you said, 5 really distinct figures. Each one is offering a pretty different vision for where Japan should go.
Okay, so who are these 5? Give us the rundown.
All right. So you've got the veteran conservative wing, represented strongly by Sanae Takaichi. She's the hardline hawk, seen by many as kind of Abe's successor in spirit.
Okay.
Then you have 2 really experienced, steady-handed types, almost technocrats, seasoned administrators, Yoshimasa Hayashi and Toshimitsu Motegi.
Just safe pairs of hands, maybe?
Potentially, yeah. And then you have this sort of battle for the next generation. You've got Shinjiro Koizumi, the young charismatic reformer, and Takayuki Kobayashi, another rising conservative. But his platform is intensely focused on this idea of economic security.
Wow, that's quite a lineup. A lot of talent, experience, and ideological variety all packed into one party race. Let's start with the candidate who actually came second last time and who seems to bring the strongest ideological punch, Sanae Takaichi.
Right, Takaichi. She's 64, a veteran lawmaker, definitely a formidable conservative heavyweight. As you mentioned, she's widely seen as the protege of the late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe.
Who is really the architect of Japan's modern defense posture.
Exactly. The driving force behind that post-war buildup. And interestingly, if Takaichi wins, she would make history. She'd be Japan's first female prime minister.
That's huge.
It is. And she's already shown she has strength at the grassroots level.
Okay.
In the 2024 contest, she was actually the top pick among the rank-and-file LDP members.
Okay. Now, her economic stance seems designed to make waves. She's really pushing back against the fiscal conservatism of the short-lived Ishiba government.
Oh, absolutely. She's not just pushing back. She proudly calls herself a fiscal and monetary policy dove.
A dove. So what does that mean in practice? Lots of spending.
Yeah, basically. It's a fiscal dove, strongly favors keeping interest rates low, aggressive monetary easing, and significant government spending. The priority is growth, immediate relief, maybe not worrying so much right now about Japan's huge national debt.
So she's promising aggressive stimulus, more spending, tax cuts.
Exactly. And the really key detail here is her support for cutting the consumption tax, the sales tax.
That's pretty unusual for a major LDP figure, isn't it? Almost populist.
It is. It's definitely a break from the party's traditional fiscal caution. She argues Japan absolutely has to shake off its deflationary mindset permanently.
And she didn't stop at fiscal policy, right? She took aim at the Bank of Japan, too.
She did, very publicly. She warned the Bank of Japan, the BOJ, that it would be, quote, stupid to raise interest rates too soon.
Wow.
Which suggests, if she becomes PM, she might try to exert political pressure to keep monetary policy easy, even if inflation is pushing the BOJ towards, normalization. She calls her approach responsible fiscal stimulus.
Okay. Let's pivot to her specialty, security and foreign policy. She's clearly the defining hawk in this race.
Without a doubt. Takaichi is a huge champion for constitutional revision. She wants to formally recognize the self-defense forces, get rid of any ambiguity about Japan's defense role.
And her nationalism is quite pronounced. The Yasukuni shrine visits, for example.
Yeah, that's part of her profile. She has a history of pretty regular visits to the Yasukuni shrine, which, as you know, commemorates war dead, but is seen by China and South Korea as a symbol of Japan's past militarism. That always causes friction.
Has she said if she'd visit as PM?
She's been a bit coy about it recently. She said something like her gratitude to the war dead will never change, but didn't commit either way. Still, the risk of, diplomatic blowback is definitely there with her.
But the policy idea that really jumps out, the one that seems like a radical departure, is her thinking on Taiwan.
Yes, this is really crucial. She's actually floated the idea of a, quote, quasi-security alliance linking Japan, Taiwan, and other like-minded partners specifically to deter China.
A quasi-alliance with Taiwan? That's bold. Japan's always stuck to the one-China policy, right? Strategic ambiguity.
Pretty much, yeah. Historically, Japan has been very careful. Takaichi's proposal to sort of formally align Tokyo with Taipei in a defense setup, I mean, that's a significant potential escalation. It really underscores how determined she is to position Japan firmly in the anti-China camp, even if it provokes a major reaction from Beijing.
And wrapping up on Takaichi, her social policy sounds like she's firmly in the traditional conservative camp.
Absolutely. Her main focus is clearly security and the economy. On social issues, she favors traditional policies. She's actively opposed reforms like letting married couples keep separate surnames, something many see as key to modernizing Japanese society.
Okay, so that's Takaichi. Now let's look at almost the polar opposite, maybe. Shinjiro Koizumi. He seems to be offering a real generational shift.
Yeah, Koizumi, he's definitely the charismatic rising star. People often call him the prince of Japanese politics. He's only 44, the youngest candidate by far.
And he has that famous name recognition. His father was PM Junichiro Koizumi.
Exactly. That helps. But he also projects this modern, reform-minded image himself. He's held big jobs already, Minister of the Environment, currently Minister of Agriculture. And importantly, strategically, he's U.S. educated.
Right, CSIS in Washington. So he speaks the language literally and figuratively.
Flawlessly. He understands the American strategic mindset, which is a huge asset in that relationship.
Now, his economic approach sounds very different from Takaichi's big stimulus plans. She wants to spend her way out of trouble. But Koizumi,
his focus is totally different. It's all about structural productivity. His agenda is about tackling the cost of living, tackling inflation by fundamentally boosting wages and how productive the country is overall.
So less about tax cuts or new debt.
Right. Instead of those sort of short-term fixes, he's urging Japanese companies, which are sitting on record amounts of cash, by the way, to actually use that money, raise pay, invest in digital transformation, innovate. He really wants sustainable structural growth, not just these short-term giveaways that balloon the deficit.
Yeah. Koizumi is also the environmental guy, right? Still a bit unusual within the LDP.
He definitely embraces that. As environment minister, he famously said fighting climate change needed to be cool and sexy to get younger people involved and drive innovation.
I remember that.
Yeah. So he supports deep decarbonization, renewables. Now, he does align with the LDP consensus on restarting nuclear reactors safely for energy security.
Okay.
But at the same time, he'd really push investment in green tech, energy efficiency. He sees climate tech as an economic opportunity, not just a burden.
And socially, he's the clear outlier, the one pushing for reforms.
By far the most socially progressive of the five. He's actively backed letting married couples use separate surnames, which is still controversial within the LDP base, challenging traditional family laws.
Right.
And maybe even more significantly, he took high-profile paternity leave when his first child was born.
That's in a message.
A huge symbolic message. Supporting better work-life balance, challenging old expectations about working fathers in Japan. He might tone down some of that rhetoric during the campaign to keep party unity.
Sure.
But he's clearly the face of gradual social change within the party.
Okay, moving from the young reformer to maybe the steady hand, the kind of figure the LDP often turns to when things feel unstable. Yoshimasa Hayashi.
Yeah, he's also 64. He's really the ultimate experienced technocrat. Right now he's the chief cabinet secretary.
So the government's number two, the PM's right-hand man.
Exactly. the crucial gatekeeper.
Yeah.
And he's held tons of key jobs before that foreign affairs defense. He's widely seen as the continuity candidate, a moderate, pragmatic guy who can deliver stable government.
And he's got this cosmopolitan side, too. Fluent English speaker, musician.
Yeah, that's right. He plays piano and guitar, apparently. And there's that great anecdote about him bonding with former U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken over music.
That says a lot about his style, doesn't it? Building rapport.
It really does. It's not just a fun fact. It shows his diplomatic approach. Hayashi uses that soft power, personal connections, to build deep trust with allies. That's something the Japanese foreign ministry really values.
So what's his economic stance? Pragmatic?
Very much so. Fiscal prudence, pragmatic management. He supports targeted help for families hit by inflation, but fundamentally he's more of a fiscal hawk.
Okay.
And crucially, unlike Takaichi, Hayashi has actually backed the Bank of Japan's move towards raising rates, normalizing policy to fight inflation. His vision is about getting Japan's finances back on a sustainable path while managing the immediate pain.
And foreign policy. Sounds like classic centrist moderation. Diplomacy first, but backed by defense.
That's it exactly. Strong diplomacy anchored firmly in the U.S. Japan alliance. But importantly, as the source material puts it, without the nationalist frills that can stir up regional tensions. He's committed to the defense buildup, pushing towards that 2% of GDP spending goal. But he sees that strength as a way to enable dialogue with neighbors. He's also continued the push for better relations with South Korea, which is vital for that trilateral cooperation with the U.S.
And given the recent LDP scandals, the ones that brought down Ishiba, Hayashi's focus on governance reform must be pretty central to his pitch.
Oh, it's core to his domestic message. He's positioning himself as the guy to restore competence, stability. He talks a lot about party unity and has strongly backed efforts to dismantle the old faction fundraising system after those slush fund scandals really hurt the party's image.
So trying to rebuild public trust.
Exactly. He wants to show the LDP can still govern responsibly, even in this tricky minority situation.
Okay. Next up, Toshimitsu Motegi, the seasoned negotiator, the trade expert.
Motegi. Yeah, at 69, he's probably the most seasoned politician in the whole race.
Yeah.
His resume is just formidable.
Harvard-educated, former McKinsey consultant.
Right. And he's held pretty much every top job. Foreign minister, LDP secretary general. He's known for being incredibly tough in negotiations, especially internationally.
Didn't President Trump call him a tough negotiator?
He did, famously. After Motegi faced off against Trump's trade representative, Robert Lighthizer, that's become kind of a badge of honor for Motegi, showing he can hold his own under intense pressure.
Okay, so what's his economic platform? Especially compared to Takaichi's big spending plans.
Motegi is more of a pro-market realist. He supports the Bank of Japan gradually normalizing monetary policy. He thinks the era of super easy money needs to wind down responsibly now to deal with inflation.
And he's not keen on handouts.
No, he's been highly critical of things like blanket cash handouts, calling them irresponsible, ineffective. His focus is much more on structural reform, getting companies to actually invest their cash hoards rather than just sit on them. And as a champion of free trade, he brings really crucial experience. He was key in getting the CPTPP trade deal finalized after the U.S. pulled out. That shows he can lead on major international economic initiatives.
And his foreign policy builds on that experience. Pragmatic, results-focused.
Firm but pragmatic, yes. He holds a hard line on the big security issues, China, North Korea, but he really emphasizes diplomacy and building coalitions as the main tools to achieve stability.
And interestingly, he's signaled he's open to working with the opposition.
Yeah, that's quite unique. He suggested he work with opposition parties if they agree on common policy goals. It shows a focus on getting things done, effective governance, rather than just sticking to party lines. You know, this deep international network, he guarantees Japan stays at the top tables globally.
Okay, finally, the youngest male candidate, Takayuki Kobayashi. His big thing seems to be economic security, which is definitely a growing theme everywhere.
That's right. Kobayashi, he's 50. A rising conservative voice. He's got solid credentials. He was Minister for Economic Security, worked in the Ministry of Finance, even had a posting at the Japanese Embassy in D.C.
But he knows the system.
He does. And ideologically, he aligns pretty closely with the nationalist wing. He appeals to members who want constitutional revision, tough security policies. He actually endorsed Takaichi back in 2021.
So how does that security focus shape his economic policy? Is it all about defense needs?
Pretty much, yeah. For Kobayashi, almost everything is viewed through the lens of security. He does propose some temporary flat-rate tax cuts to help with inflation.
Okay.
But his fundamental economic goal is supporting the nation's strategic security. That means a sharp focus on protecting cutting-edge industries, AI, semiconductors, defense tech from, hostile foreign takeovers.
And he wants specific regulations on foreign investment.
Exactly. Its core platform is pushing for stronger rules on foreigners buying land or companies, especially near Japanese military bases. Its direct reaction to rising geopolitical risks, particularly the perceived threat from China regarding espionage or influence. He really sees economic security as foundational to national sovereignty.
And on traditional defense, he's a clear hawk too, wants a rapid buildup.
Definitely. He strongly advocates amending Article 9, the pacifist clause in the Constitution, to explicitly recognize the self-defense forces. He supports a rapid military expansion, including getting long-range strike missiles. And he talks a lot about preparing Japan for crisis situations, specifically mentioning a potential Taiwan Strait emergency.
Interesting.
And both he and Koizumi have floated this idea of creating a dedicated disaster management agency. But for Kobayashi, even that seems viewed through this broader lens of internal crisis response, fitting into his overall security framework.
Wow. Okay, that's a remarkably detailed look at a very diverse field. What strikes me most is how clearly these candidates highlight the different fault lines within the LDP itself. Let's try to synthesize this now. Where are the common threads? And maybe more importantly, where are the big divides?
Yeah, if you pull back and look at the big picture, all these candidates are basically wrestling with the same core question. How does Japan move from its post-war economic model, low growth, deflation, to a modern economy that's dealing with global inflation, rising debt, and huge geopolitical pressure, especially from China?
Right.
And the policy differences, particularly on the economy, are really stark.
Okay, let's nail down that split you mentioned earlier. Stimulus versus discipline. Who are the big spenders, the doves?
Yeah.
And who are the hawks demanding caution?
Right. The doves, the ones pushing for expansionary policy, are clearly Takaichi and Kobayashi.
Yeah.
Takaichi's promising, bold, potentially massive spending increases and tax cuts, specifically hitting that consumption tax. Kobayashi also favors temporary tax cuts, though he frames it more in the context of security funding. But both seem willing to take on significantly more debt for that short-term economic relief. Their priority seems to be stimulating demand right now.
Okay. And on the other side, the fiscal discipline normalization camp.
That would be Hayashi and Motegi. Hayashi, as we said, actually supports the Bank of Japan raising interest rates to tackle inflation. That puts him firmly in the fiscal hawk category. He seems willing to accept some short-term pain for longer-term financial stability.
Right.
Motegi is equally cautious about sort of populist giveaways. He's pushing for structural reform, getting companies to invest, rather than relying on government handouts. Their goal looks much more like financial sustainability.
And Koizumi is still that unique middle path. Not big stimulus, but not immediate austerity either.
Exactly. Koizumi is the structuralist. He's not pushing for huge new debts, nor is he calling for painful cuts right now. He wants to tackle the cost of living by making the economy fundamentally more productive, boosting wages, efficiency, competitiveness. He's shifting the focus from government action to corporate reform.
Okay, let's turn to security and the Constitution. You mentioned everyone supports the U.S. alliance, but the approach seems to vary wildly, especially towards regional tensions.
Yeah, the baseline is solid. All 5 candidates strongly back the U.S. Japan alliance and boosting Japan's defense capabilities.
Yeah.
That's non-negotiable. The real divide is on the degree of hawkishness and how much diplomatic friction they're willing to risk.
So the hardline hawks, Takaichi and Kobayashi, they want a pretty dramatic shift.
They really do. They're explicitly pushing to amend Article 9 of the Constitution to normalize Japan's military role. Takaichi, with her talk about a Taiwan quasi-alliance and her history with Yasukuni visits, represents that ideological edge. She seems willing to risk friction. Kobayashi is maybe more focused on the practical side, getting those long-range missiles, making sure Japan is ready for a crisis now. They both seem ready to ditch strategic ambiguity for more explicit strength.
And the pragmatists, Motegi and Hayashi, balancing strength with, well, political reality.
Yeah, they also support the defense buildup, but they seem to balance it with skilled diplomacy. Motegi, the veteran negotiator, you'd expect him to manage complex disputes flexibly. Hayashi, the moderate centrist, would likely prioritize regional dialogue, especially keeping that fragile rapprochement with South Korea going, which is so important for trilateral cooperation with the U.S.
So they see defense and diplomacy as working together.
2 sides of the same coin, exactly.
So if you're sitting in Washington, you might prefer the pragmatists for the stability, but if you're purely focused on military capability, maybe you lean towards the hawks.
That's the core tension, I think. The ideological hawks want a big shift in Japan's posture right away. The pragmatists want to build capabilities more incrementally while trying to keep the neighborhood stable, which is, let's face it, already pretty tense.
Okay. The third big theme, social policy and reform. This is where Koizumi really stands alone, isn't he?
He's absolutely the lone reformist voice in this group. He's the only one actively campaigning on progressive social changes like separate surnames for married couples or making parental leave a bigger focus.
Trying to broaden the LDP's appeal.
Exactly. Reaching out to younger voters, urban voters. By stark contrast, Takaichi, Motegi, Kobayashi, they're either traditional conservatives on these issues or they just don't make liberal social reforms a big part of their campaign. They stick much closer to the LDP's social status quo.
Right. And finally, energy policy. Sounds like there's actually broad agreement here.
Yeah, pretty much convergence. It seems driven by recent energy price shocks and also Japan's emissions targets. All the candidates seem to support the LDP's current realistic line, which means safely restarting some of those mothballed nuclear reactors.
Energy security.
Right, energy security, and meeting climate goals. The only real difference is maybe emphasis. Koizumi, given his background as environment minister, is probably the most enthusiastic voice for renewables and climate goals. But fundamentally, all their paths seem to involve a mix of nuclear power and more investment in renewables.
Okay, this brings us to the million-dollar question, maybe, especially for our global listeners. What does all this mean for the United States? Which one of these five leaders would Washington see as, well, best for the bilateral alliance?
Yeah, this is where the analysis shifts a bit. It's less about domestic policy preferences and more about international reliability, strategic alignment, and, frankly, risk management. Washington's ideal partner. They need to show strong alignment on security, especially regarding China. But they also need the diplomatic skill to avoid causing unnecessary trouble with key regional allies, particularly South Korea.
Right, that trilateral cooperation is key. Okay, let's start with the nationalist risk then. Sanae Takaichi. She offers that robust security stance the U.S. wants, but what's the potential downside?
She really is the ultimate double-edged sword for Washington. On the one hand, she promises maximum security alignment, more defense spending, lining up with U.S. strategic goals, strong deterrence posture on Taiwan. The Pentagon probably loves that.
Sure.
But her very pronounced nationalism, especially the potential for high-profile Yasukuni visits, that creates almost guaranteed diplomatic friction with China and South Korea.
Which complicates things for the U.S.
Hugely. Since the U.S. strategy relies so heavily on that smooth Japan-U.S.-South Korea cooperation, Takaichi's actions could really strain those ties. It pulls the U.S. into difficult regional spats. So American policymakers would likely welcome her defense boost, but quietly worry about the diplomatic headaches her historical views could cause.
Okay, what about Shinjiro Koizumi, the long-term bet? Young, energetic, Western-oriented.
Koizumi would probably be greeted with a lot of optimism in Washington. He's Western-educated. He thinks internationally. He can communicate the alliance's value effectively, especially to a younger generation.
Right.
He offers that steadfast support for the alliance, but with a fresh perspective. He aligns well with current U.S. priorities, too, like climate tech, innovation cooperation. The main question mark might be his relative lack of experience in top-level crisis management compared to the others.
A potential risk there.
A potential risk, yeah. But overall, the feeling would likely be that he'd be a vibrant, modernizing partner, someone who could inject new energy into the relationship for the long haul.
Okay, then there's Motegi, the hyper-competent, tough negotiator.
With Motegi, Washington knows exactly what it's getting. Stable, highly competent management of the alliance. He's a known quantity.
Right.
He's tough, as President Trump found out, but he's seen as constructive. He understands American expectations inside and out from all those years negotiating, especially on trade. The alliance will be rock solid. You might even see a renewed focus on economic collaboration, digital trade, supply chains, investment, given his background.
Any downsides?
The concern isn't really about his competence. It might be more about whether he has the domestic political clout, the charisma maybe, to lead the LDP effectively for a sustained period and push through the major domestic reforms Japan arguably needs.
I see. Okay, and Takayuki Kobayashi, the economic security hawk. How does that align with U.S. interests?
His priorities match the current U.S. strategic playbook very closely. Strong stance on China, commitment to restricting sensitive technology exports, deepening cooperation on cybersecurity, supply chains.
All things Washington is focused on.
Absolutely. And his push for constitutional recognition of the military, greater Japanese defense responsibility, that's something the U.S. has been encouraging, quietly or not so quietly, for decades.
Yeah. So what's the catch?
The main drawback is probably his relative lack of top-level diplomatic experience compared to Hayashi or Motegi. U.S. leaders would need to invest time in building that relationship. But conceptually, his strategic alignment is exceptionally high.
Which brings us back to Yoshimasa Hayashi, the continuity choice. You said earlier he'd make Washington most comfortable. Why is that comfort factor so important right now?
Well, Hayashi offers the smoothest transition, the least risk of disruption or friction. As a former foreign minister, he already has deep established relationships with top U.S. officials. Think of that Blinken connection again. That allows for what officials love to call seamless coordination on everything from big-picture Indo-Pacific strategy down to specific technology agreements. His moderate approach also minimizes the chance of diplomatic flare-ups with neighbors like South Korea. In uncertain times, Washington really values predictability, trustworthiness, and clear communication in such a vital ally.
But is comfort enough? Does that risk complacency?
That's the nuance, exactly. While comfort and predictability are highly prized, the U.S. also needs Japan to be a partner capable of making big, sometimes difficult reforms. So Washington has to weigh the comfort Hayashi provides against maybe the strategic boldness offered by Takaichi or Kobayashi, or the long-term modernizing appeal of Koizumi.
So Hayashi offers stability, but maybe not the dynamism needed for major shifts.
Potentially. Does he have the internal political capital to really drive those massive defense spending increases the U.S. hopes for, or the bold structural economic reforms that many analysts think Japan needs? That's the open question.
So the U.S. preference sounds complex. Reliability first? Maybe. But there's a tension with the need for Japanese ambition.
Precisely. Hayashi fits the bill perfectly as this steady, reliable partner. He ensures policy momentum continues without creating new problems. Koizumi, though, is probably seen by many as the best bet for the long-term health and vitality of the partnership, ensuring the alliance resonates with the next generation.
This has been a really illuminating deep dive into Japan's political crossroads. So just to recap, the LDP faces a stark choice between, well, very different paths. A bold hawk like Takaichi or Kobayashi, a young reformer like Koizumi, or a steady, experienced veteran like Hayashi or Motegi.
That sums it up well. And regardless of who wins on October 4th, the fundamentals of the U.S.-Japan alliance will almost certainly remain strong. They're grounded in really deep shared worries about China and regional stability. But the political tone, the ability to push through major domestic changes, and Japan's diplomatic standing, especially in Northeast Asia, all of that will be dramatically shaped by who takes the helm.
So what's the final thought for our listeners to chew on while we wait for the results?
Well, the LDP is desperately seeking party unity right now. They need it to stabilize their minority government, maybe regain that majority eventually. So here's the question. If a hardline hawk wins, like Takaichi, how long can that carefully built unity actually survive the inevitable international diplomatic friction her policies might cause?
Right. That kind of assertive nationalism guarantees tension with neighbors, which always drags the U.S. in.
Exactly. But conversely, if a more consensus-oriented candidate wins, like Hayashi, can Japan actually generate the internal political will, the capital, needed for the really bold structural reforms, economic or military, that many believe the country needs for its long-term strength? It's this fundamental choice, isn't it, between ideological boldness, which risks friction, and diplomatic pragmatism, which risks maybe stagnation.